The message arrived at midnight, Earth time. Ambassador Elena Vasquez read it 3 times before she believed it was real. The Galactic Council had summoned humanity to appear before them. No explanation, no reason given, just a date and a demand. Elena had served as Earth's voice among the stars for 15 years. She had learned patience. She had learned to smile when ancient species looked at her like she was a child playing at adult games. Humanity was young in this galaxy, 300 years among civilizations that measured their histories in millions. But something about this summons felt different. It felt like a trap. The journey to Nexus Prime took 3 weeks. Elena spent most of it reading old records and preparing arguments she hoped she would never need. Her ship was small compared to the massive vessels of the elder races. It looked like a toy floating toward the great station that served as the heart of galactic civilization. Nexus Prime was a world built entirely by design. No natural feature remained. Every mountain, every ocean, every forest had been placed with purpose. At its center stood the council chamber, a building so large it had its own weather patterns inside. 2,000 species sent their representatives here. 2,000 voices spoke and voted and shaped the future of the galaxy. Humanity had one voice, one vote, one seat in the far corner, where the young species sat and waited to be noticed. Elena walked into the chamber and felt small. This was intentional, she knew. The ceiling rose so high it disappeared into artificial clouds. The seats of the elder races sat on platforms that towered over everyone else. The Cathari Dominions sat highest of all, their insectoid bodies gleaming under lights designed to make them look divine. The High Arbiter called the session to order. His name was Thalvex, and he had held his position for 6,000 years. His species had no word for hurry. The matter before us concerns the human expansion into the Viridian Corridor, Thalvex announced. His voice echoed through translation devices in every language known to the galaxy. The Cathari Dominion has filed a formal complaint. Elena felt her stomach drop. The Viridian Corridor was home to 7 human colonies. 80 million people lived there. Families had been born and raised on those worlds for generations. The Cathari High Prelate rose from his towering seat. His name was impossible for human throats to pronounce, so the translators simply called him the Prelate. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. The Viridian Corridor belongs to the Cathari Dominion, he declared. It has belonged to us since before these humans crawled out of their oceans. Their presence there is illegal. Their colonies are an invasion. We demand immediate removal of all human presence from our territory. Elena stood. If I may speak. You may not, the prelate cut her off. The Cathari are addressing the council. Young species do not interrupt. Elena remained standing. With respect, this concerns my people directly. Surely we have the right to respond to accusations against us. Thalvex raised one ancient hand. The ambassador will wait until recognized. This is the way of the council. Elena sat. She waited. The prelate spoke for 2 hours. He presented maps showing Cathari territory that stretched across half the galaxy. He showed records from 40,000 years ago when Cathari ships had surveyed the Viridian Corridor. He did not mention that those same records showed that Cathari had stripped the region of resources and abandoned it as worthless. When he finished, Elena stood again. May I now respond? The council will hear from the Theron Collective, Thalvex announced, ignoring her completely. One by one, the elder races spoke. Some supported the Cathari. Some expressed concern about the precedent. None acknowledged that humanity had anything to say about their own fate. Elena stood 7 more times. 7 times she was ignored or silenced. Finally, after 6 hours, Thalvex turned to face her. The human ambassador may now speak. Briefly. Elena felt her hands shaking. Not with fear. With fury she was fighting to control. She had prepared a careful speech. She had brought evidence that the Viridian Corridor had been empty and unclaimed when humans arrived. She had documentation showing that humanity had followed every law and protocol. She opened her mouth to begin. The council has heard enough, the prelate interrupted. We call for an immediate vote on the removal of human colonies from Cathari territory. I have not spoken, Elena said, her voice rising. Young species do not speak until spoken to, the prelate replied, and the council has decided We do not need to hear you. The vote was swift. The motion passed. Humanity had 6 months to remove 80 million people from the only homes they had ever known. The colonies would be surrendered to the Cathari, who had not set foot in that region for 40,000 years. Elena requested time to consult with Earth. This at least they granted her. 30 rotations, 1 month to accept the unacceptable. She walked out of the chamber in silence. She did not argue. She did not protest. The representatives of ancient civilizations watched her go with something like pity in their eyes. Poor young species, they seemed to think. They will learn their place eventually. Elena reached her ship and sealed the door behind her. Only then did she allow herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Her people had been judged without being heard. Their homes had been stolen by a vote they had no power to influence. She opened a secure channel to Earth and sent a single message. They won't let us speak, awaiting instructions. For 3 hours, she sat alone in the darkness of her ship. She thought about the children on those colony worlds. She thought about the farmers who had spent their lives turning dead rock into gardens. She thought about what it meant to be told your voice did not matter. The response from Earth came as a text message. 4 words that would change the history of the galaxy. Then speak through action. Elena read those words and smiled for the first time in days. She did not know exactly what Earth was planning, but she knew her people. Humanity had never been good at accepting silence. They had never learned to stay in the place others assigned them. The Galactic Council thought they had won. They thought humanity would bow and beg and eventually comply. They did not understand what they had awakened. In the weeks to come, they would learn. The galaxy would learn. Some lessons cannot be taught with words. Some messages can only be delivered through the deafening weight of silence. Elena set course for the human embassy on Nexus Prime. She had work to do. And for the first time since receiving that midnight summons, she felt something like hope. The Council had refused to let humanity speak. Very well, humanity would find another way to be heard. The news spread across human space like fire through dry grass. Every colony, every station, every ship heard what the Galactic Council had done. They heard how their ambassador had been silenced. They heard how their homes had been given away without a single human voice allowed to object. On Earth, the United Parliament met in emergency session. The Great Chamber was filled with representatives from every human world. They argued for 3 days straight. Some wanted war, some wanted surrender, some wanted to beg the Council for mercy. Admiral James Okonkwo listened to it all in silence. He was an old man now, with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent his life building humanity's fleet, knowing it would never be enough. Humanity had 300 warships. The Cathari had 30,000. The math was simple and brutal. When the arguments finally died down, Okonkwo stood. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew his reputation. Everyone knew he never spoke without purpose. "We cannot fight," he said simply. "We will lose. We cannot surrender. We will die as a people. We cannot beg. They have already shown they will not listen." "Then what do you suggest?" the Prime Minister asked. Okonkwo smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "I suggest we stop talking. All of us. To everyone." He presented his plan. He called it Protocol Quiet Storm. The concept was simple. If the galaxy would not let humanity speak, then humanity would stop participating in galactic civilization entirely. Every human everywhere would simply withdraw. No trade, no communication, no cooperation, complete and total silence. The Parliament voted. The motion passed unanimously. Within 1 week, the silence began. Human freighters stopped arriving at alien ports. Cargo that had been ordered sat in warehouses gathering dust. Trade routes that had operated for 2 centuries went dark overnight. The merchants of a dozen species sent confused messages asking what had happened. No one answered. Human scientists packed their belongings and left joint research stations. Projects that had been running for decades were abandoned mid-experiment. The Valorian Concordat had been working with human researchers on a cure for the wasting plague that killed millions of their people each year. One morning they arrived at the laboratory to find it empty. The research data was locked behind encryption that would take centuries to break. Human engineers walked away from their posts at FTL relay stations across the galaxy. These massive structures allowed faster-than-light communication and travel. Without maintenance, they would fail within months. The engineers left notes in their quarters that said simply, "We were told not to speak." Human navigators had charted safe passages through the Maelstrom Nebula, a region of space filled with gravitational anomalies that destroyed ships. These charts were humanity's gift to the galaxy, shared freely with all species. Now the servers hosting those charts went offline. Ships entering the nebula would have to find their own way. Human agricultural worlds had been feeding 17 species. The crops grown in human soil were unique, developed over centuries to provide nutrition that alien species could not produce themselves. Now those shipments stopped. Warehouses full of food sat locked and guarded. Not for sale, the signs read. Not for trade. Not for anyone. The effect was immediate and shocking. The Thyran Collective was the first to panic. Their economy depended on human trade routes. Within 2 weeks, their markets crashed. Factories closed. Millions lost their jobs. The Thyran ambassador rushed to the human embassy on Nexus Prime and demanded to speak with someone. Anyone. He found the embassy dark and locked. A single automated message played when he pressed the communication panel. Humanity is not accepting visitors at this time. The Valorian Concordate sent desperate messages to every human frequency they knew. The wasting plague was spreading. Without the cure, millions more would die. They begged for help. They pleaded for mercy. They offered anything humanity wanted. Silence was the only reply. 3 FTL relay stations failed in the first month. Communication across entire sectors of the galaxy went dark. Fleets that had traveled freely now found themselves stranded, waiting for repairs that would never come. The elder races had become so used to human engineers fixing everything that they had forgotten how to do it themselves. A Cathari scout ship approached the border of human space. The captain demanded to know what was happening. He threatened consequences. He invoked the authority of the Galactic Council. The border station AI responded in perfect Cathari. "We were told not to speak." Then the channel closed and would not reopen. Ambassador Elena remained in the human embassy on Nexus Prime. She was the only human left on the entire station. She spent her days drinking tea and reading books. Occasionally, alien diplomats would knock on her door. She would let them in, offer them refreshments, and listen politely to whatever they had to say. She never responded with more than a nod or a smile. When they asked questions, she would simply shrug. When they demanded answers, she would pour more tea. When they threatened, she would show them to the door with perfect politeness. The silence was driving them mad. High Arbiter Thalvex began receiving reports from across the galaxy. Systems were failing. Economies were collapsing. Species that had depended on human cooperation for generations were suddenly helpless. He had not expected this. No one had expected this. Humanity was young. Humanity was weak. Humanity was supposed to be insignificant. But insignificant species do not cause this much chaos simply by staying quiet. Thalvex pulled up old records. He looked at the web of connections humanity had built over 3 centuries. Trade routes, research partnerships, infrastructure maintenance, medical cooperation, agricultural support, navigation services, engineering assistance. The threads were everywhere. Humanity had woven themselves into the fabric of galactic civilization so completely that no one had noticed until they started pulling those threads out. The council met in emergency session. The Cathari prelate demanded military action against the humans for their economic warfare. But the admirals shook their heads. Human space was sealed tight. Their few warships were positioned at every entry point. Starting a war would not restart the trade routes or bring back the engineers. "What do they want?" someone asked. No one knew. The humans were not making demands. They were not negotiating. They were not even complaining. They had simply stopped. And somehow that silence was louder than any scream. On a dozen worlds, alien children asked their parents why the human ships had stopped coming, why the human teachers had gone home, why the human doctors would not answer calls anymore. The parents had no answers. The Galactic Council had no answers. The universe had no answers. Humanity had been told to be silent, so they were silent. And the galaxy was beginning to realize just how much they had lost. 3 months had passed since humanity went silent. The galaxy was falling apart. On the Valorian homeworld, hospitals were overflowing. The wasting plague had spread to every continent. Doctors worked day and night, but without the cure that human researchers had developed, they could only watch their patients die. The death count had passed 10 million and was climbing every day. The Valorian ambassador had traveled to the sealed human embassy 14 times. Each time, Ambassador Elena had welcomed him with tea and sympathy. Each time, she had listened to his desperate pleas without saying a word. Each time, he had left empty-handed. Please, he had begged during his last visit. Children are dying. Whatever we did to offend you, we apologize. Just give us the cure. Elena had looked at him with sad eyes. She had poured him more tea. She had said nothing. The cure existed. It was complete. It sat in locked human databases, waiting. All humanity had to do was release it. But they did not release it. They remained silent. The Theron Collective had entered full economic collapse. Their currency was worthless. Their trade networks had crumbled. Riots broke out in major cities as food became scarce. The government declared emergency rule, but there was nothing to rule over anymore. Theron merchants had grown rich on human trade for 200 years. They had built empires on the goods that human freighters carried across the stars. Now those freighters sat idle in human ports, and the Theron had nothing. The Cathari Dominion was suffering too, though they refused to admit it. Human agricultural exports had fed their outer colonies for generations. Without those shipments, the colonies were starving. The prelate ordered emergency food supplies sent from the homeworld, but there was not enough. There had never been enough. That was why they had relied on humans in the first place. Across the galaxy, 12 ships had been lost in the Maelstrom Nebula. Without human navigation charts, captains had tried to find their own paths through the gravitational chaos. They had failed. Search and rescue teams could not even recover the bodies. 7 more FTL relay stations had failed. Communication between entire sectors had gone dark. Messages that once traveled instantly now took weeks to arrive by physical courier. The galaxy that had felt so connected now felt impossibly vast and empty. The Galactic Council met almost daily now. The sessions were angry and chaotic. Everyone was looking for someone to blame. The Cathari blamed humanity for their illegal withdrawal from galactic obligations. Other species blamed the Cathari for starting this mess with their complaint about the Viridian Corridor. Some blamed the Council itself for silencing the human ambassador. High Arbiter Thalvex sat at the center of it all and said little. He had lived for 6,000 years. He had seen civilizations rise and fall. He had never seen anything like this. A young species. A species that had been in the galaxy for barely 3 centuries. A species that everyone had dismissed as children playing at adulthood. That species had brought the entire galactic order to its knees simply by doing nothing. Thalvex pulled up the recording of that fateful council session. He watched Ambassador Elena try to speak. He watched her silenced again and again. He watched her hands shake as she stood and was ignored. He had thought those shaking hands showed fear. Now, watching again, he realized they showed something else entirely. Rage. Controlled, disciplined rage. The kind of rage that did not explode, but instead crystallized into something hard and cold and patient. Humanity had not acted out of panic. They had planned this. They had known exactly how integrated they were into galactic civilization. They had known exactly what would happen if they withdrew, and they had done it anyway. The Malori, a young species themselves, broke ranks during one council session. Their ambassador stood without being recognized and spoke without permission. "This is wrong," the Malori ambassador declared. "We brought this on ourselves. We silenced the species and then acted surprised when they stopped speaking. Perhaps if we had listened." "The Malori will be silent," the Cathari prelate snapped. "Young species do not lecture their elders." "That is exactly the problem," the Malori shouted back. "That attitude, that arrogance, we are all paying for it now." The Malori was formally censured. Their voting rights were suspended for one cycle. But the damage was done. For the first time, a species had publicly questioned whether the treatment of humanity had been just. Others began to whisper the same question in private. How had they missed this? How had they failed to notice that this insignificant species had become so important? How had they let a petty land dispute spiral into galactic catastrophe? Meanwhile, in the Viridian Corridor, the 7 human colonies continued their lives. They farmed. They built. They raised their children. They did not evacuate. They did not flee. The 6-month deadline to abandon their homes came and passed, and the humans simply ignored it. Cathari scouts reported that the colonies were actually growing. Refugees from other human worlds were arriving daily. New buildings were going up. New fields were being planted. The humans were not preparing to leave. They were digging in. The prelate demanded military action. The council refused. No one wanted to be responsible for starting a war while the galaxy was already in crisis. And besides, what would they gain? Dead humans could not fix the relay stations. Dead humans could not provide the plague cure. Dead humans could not restart the trade routes. The living humans could do all of those things, if only they would speak. Ambassador Elena continued her daily routine in the sealed embassy. She received visitors. She served tea. She listened. She said nothing. One day, High Arbiter Thalvex himself came to her door. It was unprecedented. A High Arbiter had not visited a minor species embassy in 4,000 years. Elena welcomed him inside without showing surprise. Thalvex sat in a chair designed for humans and found it uncomfortable. He accepted tea he could not drink. He looked at the small human woman who had somehow brought his galaxy to crisis. "What do you want?" he asked finally. Elena took a sip of her tea. She smiled politely. She said nothing. "The council is prepared to negotiate," Thalvex continued. "Whatever your demands, we will consider them. Just tell us what you want." Elena set down her cup. She looked at the High Arbiter with eyes that held 300 years of accumulated insults, dismissals, and silence. Then she spoke for the first time in 3 months. "We wanted you to listen," she said softly. "You refused. So now we have nothing to say." Thalvex left the embassy with more questions than answers. Behind him, the galaxy continued to crumble. And in the Viridian Corridor, 80 million humans continued their quiet lives, waiting for the universe to learn a lesson it should never have needed to be taught. 5 months into the silence, High Arbiter Thalvex did something that had not been done in the history of the Galactic Council. He went to the human embassy not as a judge or a ruler, but as someone asking for help. Ambassador Elena opened the door herself. She looked tired but calm. Behind her, the embassy was neat and quiet. She had been alone here for months, surrounded by aliens who wanted answers she refused to give. "Ambassador," Thalvex said, lowering his ancient head in a gesture of respect, "I have come to invite humanity to address the council, not to be judged, to be heard." Elena studied him for a long moment. She had learned to read alien expressions over her years of service, and she saw something new in the High Arbiter's eyes. Not pity, not condescension, something that might have been shame. "We will come," she said finally, "but not just me. 7 speakers, 1 from each colony you tried to take from us. The council will hear them all." Thalvex hesitated. This was not how things were done. 1 ambassador per species, 1 voice per people. But he thought about the failing relay stations and the spreading plague and the starving colonies and the ships lost in the nebula. He thought about the price of pride. "Agreed," he said. The council chamber was full when the humans arrived. 2,000 species had sent representatives. The galleries were packed with observers. News drones hovered everywhere, broadcasting to every corner of the galaxy. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Ambassador Elena entered first. Behind her walked 7 humans. They were not politicians or diplomats. They were ordinary people from the threatened colonies. A doctor, an engineer, a teacher, a farmer, a governor, a scientist, a child. Yes, a child. A girl named Maya, 12 years old, born on New Viridian. She had never known any other home. She walked into the chamber holding her mother's hand, looking up at the towering seats of ancient civilizations with wide, curious eyes. The Cathari prelate rose from his platform. "This is inappropriate. Children do not address the council. This is a mockery of our traditions." "Your traditions silenced us once," Elena replied. "You agreed to hear 7 speakers. These are our 7. If you do not wish to listen, we will leave, and we will remain silent forever." The chamber fell quiet. Everyone understood what that meant. Forever was a long time. The galaxy might not survive forever. Thalvex raised his hand. The council will hear the human speakers. All of them. The first to speak was Dr. Sarah Chen. She was 60 years old with gray hair and gentle hands. She had spent her life studying diseases and finding cures. She stepped forward and spoke without notes. 3 years ago, my team developed a cure for the Valorian wasting plague. We were going to announce it at the next medical conference. We were going to share it freely, as humans have always shared our discoveries. Then the council voted to take our homes, and we fell silent. She paused. Her voice was steady but sad. Since then, 12 million Valorians have died. I have the cure. I could release it today. But first, I want you to understand something. Those 12 million people did not die because of a disease. They died because you refused to let us speak. Remember that. The Valorian delegation sat in stunned silence. Some were crying, their people were dying, and the cure had existed all along. It had been waiting for someone to listen. The second speaker was engineer Marcus Webb. He was a big man with rough hands and a quiet voice. He talked about his great-grandmother, who had helped design the first FTL relay stations 100 years ago. My family has been fixing your machines for 4 generations, he said. We never asked for thanks. We never asked for respect. We just wanted to be treated like we mattered. You told us we didn't, so we stopped fixing things. How's that working out for you? The third speaker was teacher Amira Hassan. She taught children on the colony of New Hope. She pulled out a tablet and began reading names. Yusuf, age 6, born on New Hope. Emma, age 8, born on New Hope. David, age 4, born on New Hope. She read for 5 minutes, name after name after name. Children who had been born on illegal colonies. Children who had never known any other home. Children who were supposed to be uprooted and sent into exile because of a 40,000-year-old land claim. These are not invaders, Amira said when she finished. These are children. They did not choose to be born here. But this is their home. You have no right to take it from them. The fourth speaker was Thomas Redhawk, governor of New Viridian. He was an older man with a weathered face and patient eyes. He did not make emotional appeals. He simply presented evidence. Documents showing that the Cathari had stripped the Viridian corridor of every resource and abandoned it as worthless 40,000 years ago. Records proving the region had been empty and unclaimed when humans arrived. Charts showing how humans had transformed dead rock into living worlds. You call us invaders, Thomas said, but we are builders. We took nothing from anyone. We created something from nothing. If that is a crime, then progress itself is a crime. The fifth speaker was Dr. Lisa Okafor, a scientist who had worked on agricultural development. She explained how human crops fed 17 species. She showed charts of nutritional dependencies that had developed over centuries. She described what would happen if those food supplies never returned. We did not plan this, she said. We simply helped where help was needed. We became necessary because we were generous. And now you are learning what it means to lose that generosity. The sixth speaker was Farmer John Torres. He had dirt under his fingernails and simple words in his mouth. He talked about his farm on New Viridian. He talked about the soil he had built from dust and the crops he had grown from seeds brought across the stars. You can take my land, he said. You can burn my fields. You can destroy everything I've built. But you cannot make me leave. I would rather die on my farm than live anywhere else. And I am not alone. 80 million humans feel the same way. Finally, young Maya stepped forward. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the news drone seemed to hover closer. Maya was nervous. Her voice shook a little, but she spoke clearly. I don't understand why you're angry at us, she said. We didn't do anything wrong. We just wanted to live on our planet and go to school and play with our friends. Why is that bad? Why do you want to take our homes away? She looked around the chamber at the ancient faces and alien eyes. My teacher says that when someone does something wrong, they should apologize. So I'm sorry if we made you mad. But I don't think we did anything wrong. I think maybe you did. And maybe you should apologize to us. The child finished speaking and returned to her mother. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Somewhere in the gallery, someone began to cry. Ambassador Elena stepped forward last. She did not accuse. She did not threaten. She simply asked a question. You told us that young species do not speak until spoken to. We have been in this galaxy for 300 years. We have built. We have healed. We have helped. We have given everything we have. So I ask you now, how long must we wait for you to hear us? The chamber erupted. Species that had been allies of the Cathari for millennia stood and demanded the motion be withdrawn. Others called for investigation into how this had been allowed to happen. The Cathari prelate screamed for order, but no one was listening to him anymore. High Arbiter Thalvex called for a recess. It was the first recess in the history of the Galactic Council. No one had ever needed time to think before, but everyone needed time to think now. As the chamber emptied, Elena gathered her 7 speakers. They walked out together, heads high, hearts full. They had come to be heard. And finally, after all this time, someone was listening. The recess lasted 3 days. Behind closed doors, the Galactic Council tore itself apart. The old alliances crumbled first. Species that had supported the Cathari for thousands of years suddenly remembered old insults and forgotten debts. The Cathari prelate found himself alone, defending a position that no one wanted to share anymore. The younger species saw their chance and took it. For too long, they had been silenced just as humanity had been silenced. They had accepted it because that was how things had always been done. But now they saw what happened when one young species refused to accept silence, and they began to wonder what might happen if they refused too. The Cathari Dominion, desperate to salvage something from the disaster, made one final move. Without council approval, they dispatched a war fleet to the Viridian Corridor. 15,000 ships, enough firepower to turn 7 planets into ash. The fleet commander was Admiral Crix, a veteran of 100 campaigns. He had destroyed civilizations on command. He had never hesitated. He had never questioned. Orders were orders. The fleet arrived at New Viridian expecting defenses. They found none. No warships, no orbital platforms, no weapons of any kind. The human colonies were completely unprotected. Admiral Crix opened a channel to demand surrender. The response was strange. A video feed showing ordinary life. Children walking to school, farmers working in fields, doctors treating patients, old people sitting on porches watching the sky. The humans could see the fleet. They could see the weapons pointed at their homes. And they simply continued their lives as if nothing was happening. "They're insane," one of Crick's officers said. "They must know we can destroy them." "They know," Crix replied. He was watching the feed with growing unease. "They just don't care." He ordered his weapons officers to lock targets. They obeyed. 15,000 ships trained their guns on schools and hospitals and farms, on children and old people and families eating dinner together. The entire galaxy was watching. The humans had made sure of that. They had opened their networks to every news drone, every broadcast channel, every curious observer. The universe could see everything that was about to happen. Crix's hand hovered over the firing command. One word and it would all be over. The human problem would be solved forever. But it would not stop there. He knew that now. If he fired, the galaxy would see the Cathari murder millions of innocent people. People who had not raised a single weapon. People who had simply asked to keep their homes. The Cathari would never recover from that. They would be remembered as monsters for the rest of time. While he hesitated, something appeared on the main view screen. A small figure walking onto a landing platform on the surface below. A child. A human girl. She was carrying a handmade sign. The text was written in Cathari script, carefully copied by small hands that did not know the language, but had wanted to try anyway. The sign read, "Welcome to New Viridian. Would you like to stay for dinner?" Admiral Crix stared at that sign for a long time. He thought about his own children back home. He thought about what kind of person could threaten to kill a child holding a dinner invitation. He thought about orders and duty and the difference between what was commanded and what was right. "Power down weapons," he said quietly. "Sir?" His weapons officer looked confused. "Power down weapons. All ships. Now." The order spread through the fleet. 15,000 warships lowered their guns. The greatest military force the Cathari had ever assembled became 15,000 ships floating peacefully in space, watching a little girl wave at them from far below. Crix opened a channel to the surface. This is Admiral Crix of the Cathari Dominion. I am requesting permission to land and accept your invitation. The response came from Governor Thomas Redhawk. His voice was calm and warm. Permission granted, Admiral. We've got plenty of food. Bring your crews if you want. Everyone's welcome. On Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council watched in disbelief. The Cathari prelates screamed for Crix to be arrested, tried, executed, but no one was listening to him anymore. High Arbiter Thalvex called for the final vote. The motion to remove humanity from the Viridian Corridor failed. Not narrowly, overwhelmingly. 17 species changed their votes. Ancient allies of the Cathari stood and declared their opposition. Young species that had never dared to vote against the old powers found their courage at last. When the count was finished, humanity had won. Not with weapons, not with threats, not with anger or revenge. They had won by being exactly who they were. Builders, healers, teachers, farmers, people who offered dinner to their enemies and meant it. Thalvex traveled to the human embassy one more time. Ambassador Elena met him at the door, as she always did. But this time, she was smiling. The High Arbiter began to speak, to deliver the formal ruling, to apologize for everything that had happened. Elena raised her hand to stop him. I know, she said. Would you like to start over? She poured him tea. This time he drank it. 1 year later, humanity held a permanent seat on the Galactic Council, not in the back with the other young species, at the front where their voice could be heard. The protocol of silence became law. Any species denied the right to speak could withdraw from galactic affairs without penalty until they were heard. No one would ever be silenced the way humanity had been silenced. The Viridian Corridor was formally recognized as human territory. The Cathari Dominion, humbled and changed, entered into a trade partnership with the colonies. Admiral Crix retired from military service and opened a restaurant on New Viridian. It served Cathari and human food side by side. It was always full. The plague cure was released. 14 million Valorians had died, but millions more were saved. Dr. Chen received the highest medical honor the galaxy could offer. She donated the prize money to build a hospital on New Viridian. The FTL relay stations were repaired. The trade routes reopened. The galaxy slowly healed from wounds that should never have been inflicted. And everywhere, people remembered the lesson they had learned. Ambassador Elena retired to a small house on New Viridian, not far from the landing platform where a little girl named Maya had once held up a sign and changed history. On her porch hung a small plaque with words that visitors often stopped to read. Sometimes the loudest voice is the one that refuses to beg. Years later, a new species arrived at the Galactic Council for the first time. They were nervous and uncertain, overwhelmed by the ancient civilizations that surrounded them. They took their seat in the back, expecting to be ignored. The human representative was the first to stand. She crossed the chamber floor and approached the newcomers with a warm smile. The entire council watched in silence. Welcome, she said. I know this can be intimidating. Would you like to speak first? We would like to hear your voice. The new species looked up at her with surprise and gratitude. No one had ever offered them such kindness before. Yes, they said. We would like that very much. And so it began again. A new species, a new voice, a galaxy that had learned at last to listen. In the end, humanity had not conquered anyone. They had not defeated their enemies. They had simply shown the universe what they had always known about themselves. That strength is not measured in weapons or warships, that the mightiest force in existence is the simple, stubborn dignity of people who refuse to be less than they are. The galaxy had told humanity to be silent, and through that silence, humanity had spoken louder than words ever could. They had spoken through kindness, through patience, through the unwavering belief that every voice deserves to be heard. And the universe, finally, had listened.